So there's a working assumption that the federal government cares for us because, as their inherent responsibility, it is their job to care for us. And there's no strong motivation or evidence to support that they would actually do that, despite the fact that it is their responsibility. If you look at the trend as we progressed, as the population has increased, the number of states have increased, we have actually drifted further and further away from a federal government who has an inherent concern for the well-being of its individual citizens. And this is a strong case for the entire argument for states' rights. And states' rights has sort of been stigmatized over the years as a concept that's associated with a civil war and consequently with slavery, and the backwards stigma that's associated with the South. And so what we have to understand is that states' rights is not a outdated concept. This is the reason why we have the Electoral College. This is the reason why the Electoral College still works very well. This is why democracy is still intact, is because states maintain the integrity of the federal government. Without the concept of the Electoral College, without states' individuality, you have two entities. You have the populace, the masses, and you have the federal government. And the federal government is massively concerned with their own interests, and the populace is massively uninformed. What happens there is that the populace is very easily influenced by the federal government, who has they're equally distinct from the populace. They're separated. They're isolated from the populace in a lot of ways, in the same fashion that the populace is separated from them. The difference is that the populace has their own interests at heart. They lack the means, the understanding to advance their own interests, whereas the federal government actually does. They operate with actually a very strong understanding of that. It's actually inherent in that position. That is what the position is about. That's how you advance, is by understanding how to advance your own agenda, the agenda of the people that you represent. And by represent, I mean the people that actually fund your office. So what you have is two very, very, very separate entities whose understanding of each other is very limited. One, the populace with a very large majority of voices, but very, very silent voices as a rule, and then the very small minority with a very strong voice, with the appearance of power, even though in reality power is simply something assumed by people. We don't actually have power unless it's given to us, and by given means you actually have to. You have to assume that the people who allow you to have power will give it to you, and the people that give it to you have to assume that you have it, and they have to accept that. So power is something that's assumed. It's not real. It's generally a figment of your imagination. At any moment, no matter what you have that supports your power, that can dissipate, disappear on its own. So the reality is, without that center point, which is the states, the federal government is out of control. It is unchecked, and without that center point, the citizens have no voice. And so, while there is a an argument that states that the majority of citizens are in favor of something, the minority are not, therefore the majority should rule. What you have to focus on is that in the short term, that may be just. The majority may want this, the minority may want that. But what actually works in the long term is having a middleman. It's not a great term because it has negative associations with it, but it really is. It's an intermediary, someone who has your interest at heart, but understands the process and is able to speak the lingo, is able to represent you to that minority, that strong minority, and communicate to you what their intentions are, and hear your voice and operate in the middle there. That is the necessity for a strong state government. And what we've lost is that individuality of states, the states being able to self-regulate, states being independent of the influence of other states' regulations. We now have this concept of precedent. If one state passes a law, very quickly those laws trickle down, they trickle up first, of course, to the federal government. The federal government, allows that, and because of the pressure that's applied because of a federal government that accepts a certain law and says this law is acceptable, therefore all states must acknowledge that law, or consequences that may or may not happen in every situation. But it's not uncommon for federal government to say, if you don't toe the company line, so to speak, you're going to lose federal funding. We see this in both conservative, Republican, whatever you want to call it, administrations, and the left leaning, the Democratic administrations, where if a state does not recognize certain laws or doesn't adopt certain laws, they start to fall behind, and so this is what happens in a situation where we have a strong central government, a strong federal government versus a strong state government, where local municipalities have a stronger say. The federal government is designed to interact between state governments. They're not designed to interact with individual citizens. They're not designed to draw their taxes, their funding from individual citizens. That was never the intention. This is why we have an electoral college. It's self-evident in the fact that we don't have individual citizens electing federal, people who hold federal offices. And the reason for that is because the federal government was designed to be an institution that represented the states, not an institution that represented the individual citizens. And this is why it's necessary for the states to take back some of that control, because they are designed to be represented by the federal government. If the federal government doesn't represent the states, then they are held accountable by the states, not the individual citizens. That was never the intent. The problem is, if you have a federal government that is not only dictating the lifestyle, the day-to-day operation of citizens, but also taxing citizens, they're essentially drawing their power from the citizens, even though the citizens never gave them that right. We have by compliance, The only thing that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. It's that concept that we have, by not acting, we have given the federal government power to dictate policy to the citizens, to draw their funding from the citizens, to bypass the states, which were initially designed to not only benefit from the federal government but be regulated by them, and maintain that balance. Something that was lost during the Civil War. We have reached a state where we as citizens are regulated by a power so far beyond our own influence. If you work for a company, a large company, a corporation where you represent a small branch. This is something I'm familiar with. You work somewhere. You have people that work at McDonald's. You have people that work at Kroger. You have people that work at Walmart, wherever. And someone comes in and they say, "I don't understand why this is so expensive," or "I don't understand why this is your policy," and they have an issue. There are certain things that you have certain leeway with, but as a rule, the response is, "I don't make the rules. This is not my decision. I don't even know the person that makes the decision, and they wouldn't listen to me even if I did. What do you want me to do about it?" And this is the same scenario. The further removed you have someone who makes the rules versus the people that are either enforcing the rules or subjected to the rules, the less in touch the rules are with what is actually beneficial to the people. If you remove the concept of benefit, some sort of manipulation of the system where someone benefits from a rule, corruption or whatever. Even if you remove all of that, and even if the intentions are pure, you still have a system that's based on a dilution of the truth. And the truth is what's happening down at the very bottom, because that's not just where the rubber meets the road, which is what it is, but that's where the majority of the people live. We live at the bottom of the heap, and this is where everything is really happening. This is the most real. This is where poverty happens. This is where disease happens. This is where revolutions happen. This is where everything happens. It starts all at the bottom. If you're not in touch with that, because you're so removed by so many layers, you can't possibly hope to manage it properly. Even if you have the best intentions, and even if you're the wisest leader, you can't get a sense of what's happening down there because you're so removed from it. You have to remove layers, or you have to simply reduce the power of that highest level and say you're simply responsible for managing the interactions between the middle level management, which is the states, and which is what was intended as the original process. If you look at Madison and Jefferson's writings, they discuss the concept that states would. It was almost like they anticipated this happening, and this is not unusual or especially foresightful of them, because at the original formation of the 13 colonies, the United States, there was a lot of dissension between the states. They were not particularly cozy with each other. There were certain states that got along better, and there were certain delegates that interacted better. But as a rule, the states were all very distrustful of each other. There was a lot of differing views on how things should be done. You had the extremes, like John Adams, who was very pro old world with the with basically a reconstitution of the monarchy, and you had people that were extremely, if you want to use the word modern, who were very opposed to that concept, who were very free thinking, who believed that the individual citizens had a much higher calling, had a much higher significance in the grand scheme of things. And so there's all this conflict, and there's all this mistrust, and it was a whole new concept the American Revolution brought out of citizens with rights, who were not simply owned by the government, who were not simply serfs, but they were actually individual citizens with individual rights and individual investments. And because of all this, states didn't want to simply jump into the same bed together. They didn't want to all just. They were not the same. They were different, and they had different beliefs, and they had different views, and they represent people with different beliefs and different views. And that was the whole point. Was they were representing people that didn't all necessarily agree. And this is why they were very early on. There was discussion of the concept of secession or a dissolution or whatever. And I think everybody understood that it was critical for the success of the states to unite, but it was also critical for the long-term success that they be given the right to leave if it was necessary for the interest of the constituents that they represented. And this is where, again, you have an issue of too many layers and not enough representation. And you can talk about issues till you're blue in the face. You can talk about whatever causes initiated the Civil War, whatever good was on either side, whatever bad was on either side. But the fact of the matter is, right now we have states that are not representing their citizens. We have citizens that are just never represented, period. And we have a federal government that is directly taxing citizens. And if you feel like your money is being spent incorrectly, you have no recourse. You don't have a recourse. You could go to court. If you have the best lawyer, you might win your case. But the odds of that setting a precedent for somebody else, well, first of all, you even succeeding in that endeavor is slim to none. But if you actually were to do that, the odds of you actually being able to set a precedent, there's precedent for the income tax being unconstitutional. But the reality is, as a citizen, you are subject to the rules of the federal government. It's nothing more than extortion. It is essentially organized crime. It's mafia. They're paying you for the right to run your own business. They're paying for the right to work. You're paying for the right to own your own property. This is your property. You have the right to own it. You have the right to enjoy it. You don't have to pay taxes on something you've already paid for. There's absolutely a necessity for some sort of taxation to maintain a civilized society. But it doesn't mean that you should pay when you make money. You should pay when you save money. You should pay when you spend money. You should pay when you pay for everything that you currently own. You're taxed on everything. And the advantage tends to lie with the extremely poor, who have figured out that laws are generally put in place to benefit them because they're seen as underprivileged, they're seen as needy, and so laws are put in place to allow them to benefit from that. The intent is to help them, keep them alive, whatever, give them an opportunity to have an education. But the reality is that if you give someone something and they don't work for it, they're going to just take it and they're gonna want to expect more. The reality is, you give someone something for nothing. You're not gonna demand that they do something to get the next handout. They're just simply going to continue to take that. That's human nature. It doesn't matter if they're a good person or a bad person. It doesn't matter. They're going to take it. And they're going to continue to want to take it. The other end of the spectrum is the very rich. They have figured out that you can hire a tax a tax accountant, someone who's adept in interpreting tax law and establishes processes that allow you to avoid taxation. And so what you end up with a middle class, people who don't have who have too much at stake to rely on the federal government, so they want to maintain their own lifestyle because of their own hard work, but they don't have enough money to influence the taxation process. And so you end up with a middle class that essentially pays the massive burden of both the upper class and the lower class. And it's not to say that the rich don't pay their taxes, and not to say the poor don't pay taxes, but the middle class is essentially overtaxed. And this is the establishment of the class warfare process, where the middle class is upset with the rich, they're upset with the poor, the poor resents everybody, the rich takes advantage of everybody, and this middle class, or this whole class warfare process, is another political tool to distract us from the fact that we have a federal government that's overreaching, that has too much power, that has too little checks. We have a presidency that can establish they can essentially pass into legislation laws without having any congressional approval. Yeah, there's checks and balances. There's some checks and balances but every time the Constitution is ignored in favor of what seems to be the right thing, it doesn't matter if it's the right thing or not. On principle, if it's the wrong thing, if you have the Supreme Court either vetoing a bill or approving a bill that is unconstitutional, it doesn't matter if it seems like it's the right thing for that situation. You have a presidency that is issuing essentially edicts in a very tyrannical sense. Even if they support what you believe, you're establishing a concept of federal control, and this is why we have states. This is why we have the concept of the Constitution. This is why you have states, to regulate that, to create a separation, to create a representation. You hold your state government in check. You hold them responsible for what they do, and in turn, the state government holds the federal government in check and holds them responsible for what they're supposed to do. And this is how you maintain a stable federal government. This is how you maintain a stable country. Everybody have a good night. I'm out.